Hello, this is Greg Gorgone, co-founder and COO of Pineapple Academy. It is my pleasure to present to you today how to redefine your workforce. We're going to talk about how servant leadership transforms culture and fuels long-term employee engagement. And joining me today is our good friend, Marcel Schwantes. Great to have you here today. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Greg. My name's Marcel Schwantes. I am an executive coach, and I'm an Inc. contributing editor and speaker. And I founded a company that does leadership development. That company is called Leadership from the Core. Glad to be here today.
Thank you for sharing that. It's great having you here. This is such a passionate subject for all of us here at Pineapple Academy. We really know that, in order to make a true impact in an organization, it really starts from the top. And this subject matter is near and dear to me, but it also aligns with what we're trying to do for the frontline staff. So thanks for joining us today. And we'll just get into this first slide here and turn it over to you. Tell us about the building blocks of servant leadership.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to give a bit of a background before I dive into these 6 building blocks. So I'm going to present a leadership philosophy and best practice as known as servant leadership, which these days
Yeah.
is becoming more prevalent as a people-centered style of leading. So this model of leading others has a direct link, and you kind of got a hint in the title. It has a direct link to employee engagement and high performance in most businesses. So along the way, I'm going to introduce you to the 6 building blocks. But first, let me share a little bit about my background and how I arrived at servant leadership. Okay. Well, back in the days when I was actually working and doing the corporate grind, I had a boss very much that was a great example of servant leadership. I'm going to flash back to 2005. He was an executive and I was a director reporting to him. And
Right.
nothing I had experienced, Greg, up to that point in my young career pointed to that kind of style. I mean, all of the bosses previous to that were toxic, top down, command and control, hard driving, do as I say kind of mentality, right?
Right.
And then this boss comes along, and it took a while to get used to it. Okay, because my orientation prior to that was, well, it's you just take orders, right? So what made this person differently? Well, he connected with his team. He gave us tools to succeed, new experiences and opportunities for us to learn and develop. And he asked for feedback, not only feedback on how we were doing, but how he was doing, right, as our boss. And that was totally foreign to me. So yeah, he asked questions like, how can I help you meet your goals? And how can I be a better boss? He's coming to us for feedback on how his performance is, right? So unheard of at that time. And so this was the first for me, as I said, in a corporate setting, and I admit it took a little bit of time to get used to it because, again, it was rare given the history of previous bosses. So what was the foundation for his leadership, and why did we respond so well? Well, let me share some inside knowledge about servant leadership, okay? And this has been published in research, Greg, over the last 30, 40 years. But this is not something that you're going to read in the headlines. Okay, so true leadership is a matter of both the head and the heart. So what we find is that there are plenty of leaders that have a vision, they create strategic plans, they have strong KPIs, measures of success, and then they drive results and focus on the numbers, but they fail to focus on the head, on the heart part. And the heart part
Right.
is they forget the people. They
Yeah.
forget the relationships. So that's the heart part. So let me go back to my boss back in 2005. He was smart. He was very strategic and held us accountable, right? So he had the head part down, like most leaders do, right? But he also led through his heart and with his heart because his number one priority was to empower us to succeed. And so when we did, he did as well, right? So the whole organization actually succeeded. So, yeah, I'm going to jump into my studies now over the last 20 years. Well, I wanted to find out what makes the best leaders so effective and what made him so effective in the way that he led us. And so I basically stumbled into servant leadership. And so I finally arrived at uncovering 6 behaviors or the building blocks as you see here. So I want to dive into a little bit, but I want to dive into it, but just kind of leave enough for people to, maybe get their feet wet and want to learn more about it by reaching out to us later. So
Right.
through partnerships with people much smarter than me in academia who have tracked the research for 40 to 50 years, I was able to boil down a high performing organization through the principles and practices of servant leadership to 6 building blocks, or 6 key practices, if you will. And they are:
Sure.
servant leaders display authenticity. That's the first one. I'm going to just run through real quickly and then I'll touch on each one and then we can
Okay.
advance the slides. So servant leadership first, they display authenticity, they value people, they provide leadership, they share leadership, they develop people, and the last but not least is they build community. So this is the framework that I mentioned at the beginning. This is kind of how we start the whole process when we take leaders through a journey of leadership development and we put them through our courses and our coaching. This is kind of the framework of what they're going to learn to raise their capacity to lead well, whether it's frontline workers or if you're an office environment or even hybrid or remote. So
Right.
let me cover briefly each one. If you go back to the first one right there, yeah.
Yep.
Um, and so the display of authenticity is a tough one. And what we found is that the effective servant leaders at their best are transparent, and they model vulnerability. These are fuzzy, touchy-feely words, or at least it sounds like it, right? But
Right.
what we find is that when you model these kinds of behaviors, it's really the most courageous thing that you'll do as a leader, is actually model transparency and become more self-aware of what how people are feeling. And so servant leaders model authenticity and display it by seeking to understand themselves and then understanding others. Because when we do that, then we can quickly problem solve to an agreed solution, and so things move a little faster when you're not holding on to information and creating silos around different teams or departments. So that's the display authenticity part. The next one is the value people. So there we go. So valuing people is really the crux of servant leadership, Greg. Um, it comes down to meeting the needs of others, because when you do, here's what happens: you gain their loyalty and commitment, right? And that leads to high employee engagement. And valuing these people these days, it includes a crucial aspect of leadership that we never saw coming. So when COVID hit, we've seen the evolution and the acceleration of well-being, right? We talk about workplace well-being and mental health. All these things now are at the forefront of good leadership. And so we're seeing the importance of social connectedness, for example. And so, people are naturally wired as human beings to connect to others and to belong in a
Right.
community and belong in a community of shared values. I'm going to touch on that because that has also a lot to do with the last building block. We'll get to it. It's the building community building block. So I'm jumping ahead a little too much here. So servant leaders value people by taking care of their needs, and so much of that has to do with their well-being. All right, the next one.
So just to touch on that for a second, I think some of
Yeah.
the confusion I have witnessed on this particular valuing people, there's a difference between, leaving the office as the boss because you're going to take your employee's kid to the dentist or something. So, showing interest in people is very important, but it doesn't mean that every action is actionable in terms, it's just having enough empathy to understand what that person's going through and help them work through the solution. Is that a way to say it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that to your point here is where compassion and empathy comes into play as a
Yeah.
leadership strength. Again, two very fuzzy words, right?
Right.
Compassion and empathy. But when we bring that to basically clear the obstacles from people's path so they can succeed, of course
Right.
it's going to make a difference in how they feel, emotionally, psychologically, And so, yeah, absolutely. And in this day and age, burnout is a high factor in a workplace. So we
Yeah,
want
it
to
really
remove
is.
whatever is getting in the way of people feeling good about work, right? If something is leading them to burnout, for example, a super heavy workload, you're not going to get the best out of your employee. So
Right.
that's not valuing them, right? So you want to
Right.
release the burdens on them so they can perform at a higher level.
Nice.
All right. Next one is, oh, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So provide leadership is a skill that it brings, I mentioned the head and the heart, right? So this brings the head back kind of into play because great leaders, they're going to envision the future consistently and they will clarify goals and expectations because Greg, things change as we experienced with a global pandemic. Literally overnight, we had to shift to most of us in remote settings. And those frontline employees in the hospitality and retail, et cetera, probably didn't. But although companies did shut down, no matter
Yeah.
what your however you worked, but eventually they got back on the front lines. But things change drastically sometimes, and we have to kind of shift with that. And in providing leadership, people are looking at the leader always for direction.
Right.
And so when you set expectations and suddenly something shifts, you have to reset expectations and then making sure that communication is filtered down to people on the front lines because
Right.
they are waiting for that leader to basically guide them and set the direction in the new direction as well. All right.
Right.
So this is all about providing direction and steering the ship forward. Clear expectations, having clear goals that people really understand so that you never want your employees to say to another employee, well, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
Right.
That is a clear indication that there's no direction. So this falls under providing leadership.
Love it.
All right.
Makes sense.
The next one is share leadership. And Greg, this is a tough one for a lot of people that come from a top-down command and control style of managing or leading, because the research here found that the strength in great leaders, great servant leaders, comes from sharing power and sharing decision making. Very counterintuitive, right? If you hang on to your
Right.
power and your control, you're not going to want to release that. But the research is saying otherwise, that you have to be able to push your authority down and free people up to make decisions and to lead themselves, because solutions are going to travel a lot faster. Information is going to travel a lot faster. So this
Right.
is about sharing your leadership.
And it's also about satisfying the needs of, say, a customer or a client in that moment. I mean, we always have to remember everybody on the team represents the brand or the company. And so if you go to the weakest link of that whole thing and they're not able to solve a problem for a customer or a client, you might have just lost a client for no good reason other than that person didn't feel they had the authority to say, hey, let me do this for you. Let me take care of the situation and, we'll move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right. So the next one is develop people, right? So this skill of a servant leader is it comes in really strong because these days, employees, especially younger generations like Gen Z, come into the workforce looking for career development. That's one of the
Right.
one of the top reasons when people are interviewing for jobs. One of the top reasons that they are looking at your company is because they want to build a career, right?
Right.
And so in the research, great leaders provide for learning and growth, and they develop potential and career paths for other people.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And last but not least is build community. So how do servant leaders build community? Well, it's all about the relationships on over here. So it's relating well to others at all levels, right? It's not just hanging out in the quote ivory tower
Right.
and handing down commands down to people, or as they call it, the worker bees. No, you have to be able to relate to people at every level. If you're in an environment where you're still in a face-to-face environment, you want to do what's called a walk your four corners, be visible. No,
Yes.
right? And so that people know, hey, there's a real person here, and he cares about, he's coming to check in on us, to see how we're doing, etc.
Right.
Right? So this piece here also addresses the DEI initiatives. I know it's a buzz term these days, DEI, but servant leaders have been doing DEI for decades, even before it became a kind of a
Right.
check the box social initiative, right? So the big one here is the belonging piece. So now we have to add B to that acronym. So it's DEIB, if you want to stick to the acronym,
Right.
because servant leaders they're prolific at promoting a sense of belonging and connection for all team members, right? That's important for younger generations as well. So I'm going to bring in Gen Z back to the conversation
Right.
because they have different needs than, say, my generation. I'm a Gen Xer. So Gen Zers coming into the workforce, they have different needs. They want to connect with others and feel like they belong.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I actually think that shift in viewpoint is very healthy. When I reflect, I'm actually a baby boomer. And
Mhm.
so I grew up exactly the way you were describing earlier. It's like I grew up in an environment where it was a top-down thing. It's like, go do this, go do that, and you just did it the direction. And so and sometimes you do need to step up and give clear direction to get something done if there's a situation going on. Obviously, there's times when you have to do those kind of things, but at the same time, if you don't engage with those staff and you're not, being like you said, just touching a desk or going into a workstation or being there and taking interest. Oh, what do you got going on? Do you need any help with that? I mean, it's the simplest thing. Some people call it rounding, other people call it other things in the different worlds that I've worked in. But at the end of the day, it really is just taking interest in that person. And I love that the young people are pushing us old people to recognize that there is another side of this. And it's you already said it. It's like you're not just running your business here, you're doing it here as well. And I just personally, I just love that. I love seeing the
Yeah.
growth and maturity of where all this is going. And I hope many people take it to heart,
Yeah. Yeah.
literally. Interesting. Well, and that's kind of, if you take a look at, what we're trying to do with Pineapple and really the purpose of this conversation is really, it's like, how do you apply these things to the workforce? What are the things you can take away from this today to go in and provide, the servant leadership attitude and viewpoint. But it's absolutely amazing to me how many managers I've worked with through the years or observed as a consultant going in, they spend 95% of their time in their office at their desk.
Mm.
And they say things like, I'm so busy. Well, they're busy doing reports, they're busy doing financials, they're busy doing schedules, they're busy doing things that aren't really running the business. Those are admin actions. Those are necessary for higher ups or investors to see, the KPIs and all that, right?
Yeah.
But it's not doing anything for that unit or for that business at that moment when you're sitting at your desk, doing paperwork. Do you see that, or you must have observed that?
Well, I have observed that, and one of the things that I also observe is that we senior leaders are responsible for bringing in people that they're going to identify as potential future managers, right? To be able to then promote those people into influential roles. But we
Right.
have the wrong criteria, Greg. We have the wrong criteria for promoting people into the higher ranks. We haven't broken that cycle, and so we still see the manager as large and in charge, as somebody that has to have all the
Right.
answers, has to have control, and so we have the management piece, I think, down, and that speaks to the head part, right? Managing tasks and scheduling and make sure that people are, doing what they're supposed to do, right?
Right.
But we haven't integrated the leadership piece into the management role so that it's a good balance of the two, right? I mean, we
Right.
still need management to be able to function as a leader, but
Right.
managers need leadership to be able to inspire, motivate human beings to
Right.
be and do
Right.
their best.
So let's talk about that just for a minute,
Yeah.
the difference between leadership and management, because this is something that, I have observed, throughout my life and try to improve my skill sets as a manager to become a leader. And, now that I'm on this side of it, of the situation and observing and reading reports and stuff, the situation with management in this country is very poor. I mean, if you
Mm.
take a look at some studies, like Gallup came out with a study a couple of years ago about the skill sets and the effectiveness of management, it wasn't very flattering. And if you talk to employees, and we read about, why do people leave a job? And 9 times out of 10, they quit the manager. They don't necessarily quit the organization, but they quit that manager. Can you touch on that a little bit from a leadership point of view? And like, what do you think the solution is to bring our managers up to a point where they're also exemplifying these traits? Granted, they got work to do every day that they're responsible for, but it doesn't mean that there should be robots and it's just right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to touch on that. If managers elevated their leadership, their work, their roles will be much easier, and their
Yes.
performance as managers would be much better. Okay, so I see the difference like this, Greg. Tell me if you agree with me. I see management as the role is to control people in order to achieve an objective, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then I see leadership as the ability to influence and motivate and empower others to
Right.
meet those objectives.
Right.
But when we don't have the influence, the motivation, the mentoring, and the empowerment piece, all we're doing is we're micromanaging and we're just being
That's right.
we're raising the stress levels of our employees.
Right.
Yeah. So speaking of stress level, I got a stat for you.
Yeah.
Stanford professor Robert Sutton has written quite a few books. Dr. Sutton interviewed thousands of employees and found that 75% of them indicate that an immediate supervisor's management approach creates the most stress in their jobs.
There you go. Right.
And that's consistent with Gallup, right? I mean,
it really is. I mean, to think that, I mean, we're all people at the end of the day. And we all have our needs and wants, and we all have lives, outside of the office or outside of work too. And we're all trying to manage these things. And so to look at the staff as nothing more as a position in the organization or their employee payroll number, it really does a disservice to everybody. The company, the ownership of the company, the customers, fellow coworkers, it just goes on and on and on, and it's just really sad to see that some people think that is who that person is. It's like, no, they're Dolores over there, prepping the salad. She's also a mother. She's also, a wife, and she's got friends, and she's got a church group she belongs to. I mean, she's a person, she's got a life, and I think that's something that as leaders, we really need to recognize, like, stuff happens, I can't tell you how many times I've been in restaurant situations where employees need to do basic things like, go to the doctors or go vote or get their car worked on or whatever. And yet they can't get these things done because the boss says, no, you're on the schedule. So, you own it. And if you don't come in, then don't come back. Wow. It's like, seriously, dude. Meanwhile, you go off and go for an hour lunch with your buddies, or you go, the dentist whenever you want to go. I mean, there's like that double standard, and it's just not okay. It just is. It's sad.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the double standard, because in the studies that I mentioned, the one that falls under share leadership is talking more about the status, how we need to give up this idea that we are above other people.
Right.
Right. And a lot of it has to do with the history of where we've come from, from the Industrial Revolution right into where we are now. We still kind of operate through the Industrial Revolution of our minds, where we think that because we have a title that says manager of or director of, our positional authority elevates us above other people.
Correct.
And so therefore I'm entitled now. So you kind of have an edge over them. We have to eliminate that superiority complex, remove that completely. And I'm not saying, Greg, or implying for a second that this is opening up the door to being a doormat manager. You still
totally correct. Yes.
Right. You still hold people accountable for
right.
performing and for excellence, right?
That's right.
But you're not neglecting the human aspect of what people need to be inspired, to grow, and like you said, if they need help because they need to pick up their kid and no one else can do it, you're there to provide that avenue for them, to say, hey, around here, it's okay for you. We're going to give you the flexibility to do that.
Right.
And they can, come back and do another shift or do something else to make up for that time.
There's always a solution if you're willing to listen and work together. There always is. No, that's great stuff. So, this goes to this slide here, the shrinking workforce. I mean, I think we all know that the demographics in this country are changing dramatically. And so, with that happening, it really creates opportunity for companies to really analyze and self-reflect on how they've been doing things in the past, and really shifting gears to, what is in front of all of us, the aging population and the not big enough workforce, and kind of retool. And I think this subject of servant leadership coupled now with technology, I think a lot of companies, whether a mom and pop restaurant or a big corporation, an IT company or a medical company or whatever, by leveraging technology, we can make the workplace a smarter, better place with less heavy lifting. But at the same time, it's people that's using the technology. And if we use the technology as a tool and not to replace the individual or the significance of the people, I think that is a kind of a tightrope walk that we're all kind of going into right now with the use of technology. It's like, okay, there's still people that have to use the technology to get the job done. It's not just about a computer is going to solve our problem or an app is going to do the work. No, it's still a human-based activity, regardless. And so it takes that engagement of leadership and managers to train and lead and show them how the technology can help do their jobs, but in a responsible way. So it's not just the technology that leadership and ownership thinks doing the work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 Technology it's not going to replace human beings. It's just going to
No.
enhance how they do the work
Right.
and how they perform. Right.
Right. I think it's going to help impact in productivity, engagement, and I think it also in some industries will shrink the number of employees, but some of those industries probably have been overstaffed anyway in the past because the engagement level wasn't very good and the leadership and the management wasn't good enough to get the productivity to where it should be or could be. People are capable of doing a lot more than we give them credit for. And that's always been my philosophy managing teams. Like, if you throw me a team of 100 people to manage, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, is there too many people here because, it was some culture or whatever situation, which then reduces engagement and people's interest in their job, So you got to find that right balance in your own organization of people, technology, and the process you're trying to do, and have the right amount of people.
And Greg, in servant leadership, if technology is nudging someone out of a job, the servant leader looks at every opportunity to either reskill or upskill that person so that
There you go.
so that you never leave them out in the street.
Right.
Right. And that speaks
That's
to
right.
the develop people part of the research.
Right.
Because people want to grow.
That's
And
right.
so if their skills no longer apply because, technology has advanced and it has eliminated whatever tasks they're supposed to do,
Right.
then put them in another area and then build up their competency in that area.
Yes, I
Because
agree.
like you said, we have to have the belief that people will do great things when you allow them to do it. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, quick story. I was in a project once, and it was a hotel project. We were putting in new computers, and there was a woman there who had been working at that front desk probably 25 years. And, she had a real phobia with computers. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just, I mean, this is like the early 90s. So, I mean, everything is new with computers and whatnot. And she just could not. And so, obviously, some companies would have said, well, then, you're going to have to leave and we'll hire somebody. Well, what we did is we just found a different role for her, different seat on the bus, where she was comfortable and she didn't have to use a computer. I mean, there's plenty of work, right, that has to get done. And so to your point, that's what we did. We just figured out and worked together until we figured out a place where she could work and be comfortable and happy and continue. And she's been there for 25 years,
Yeah.
So. Well, this has been a great conversation. I don't know if we have any other things we want to cover, or if we have any questions that people want to know about, but I'm gonna take a look here. If I can get my mouse to cooperate. So, Marcel, in your experience, what are the common misconceptions or challenges that leaders face when trying to adopt a servant leadership approach? That's a great question.
Yeah, that's an easy one. And it is a great question. It comes up often. And that is that the misconception that servant leaders are weak. And
Right.
I mentioned a while back, even the thought that this kind of leadership orientation will open yourself up to being walked on, or for people what might see
Right.
you as a doormat. So they'll try to take advantage of you. It's completely the opposite, because servant
Yes.
leaders, you have the servant part, that's the taking care of people part, but you also have the leadership part, which I
Right.
mentioned, right? It's about holding people's holding people accountable to high performance,
Right.
to excellence. But it's never dropping them out of a helicopter into a fire zone, right?
Right.
Yes, they are there to perform and do good work, but you have to come alongside them to support them and make sure that obstacles are removed from their path for them to do that.
Right.
That's why there's such a great balance of the two. You don't neglect either one. So it's a merging
Right.
of the two styles, right? The servant and the
I love
leadership.
that. Yeah. I think that's super important. I agree with that. So I think we got time here for one more question. What strategies or tools do you recommend for assessing and meeting the unique needs for each team member while still achieving operational goals? Wow, that's quite a mouthful, but I think I get the idea. Yeah.
you know, any assessment tool. I mean, we got assessment tools. Gallup has the Q12
Right.
employee engagement survey, 12 simple questions. It's just a way for you to throw questions at your workforce to capture the current sentiment, right? It could
Right.
be a simple pulse survey. Um, and then you want to capture the data of, take the temperature in the room,
Right.
because once you really understand what's going on and how people feel about the work, their environment, and their bosses, now you
Yeah.
can do something about it.
Right. I think, when I think about that question and looking at my past, I think one of the other things that, we want to encourage people is to identify a problem. If when you're assessing your business and you're looking where there's pain points or pinch points or issues, over cost, whatever, the smartest people to go talk to are the people that are doing the work. Not some analyst or some, necessarily consultant coming in or whatever. I mean, certainly you want to get different vantage points, but the people who are actually doing the work, 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you the answer. They'll tell you what the problem is, and they'll tell you how to solve the problem.
Yeah.
At least that's been I've experienced it many times myself. So I just think it's kind of funny how, we all managers seem to get all wrapped up around a problem and they think it's unsolvable, but meanwhile their crew can tell you exactly what to do and to get their buy-in, and then update the policy procedure and boom.
Yeah, the famous Steve Jobs quote, right? The late Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "We don't hire people so they can no, we don't hire people so we can tell them what to do. It's the opposite. So we hire people so
Yes.
they can tell us what to do." Because
Yes.
Jobs recognized that there is immense talent and creativity in
Yeah.
the people you hire. Of course, you hire smart people, right? And so let them use their brains.
Yeah. Well, I mean that takes a leader or an executive or manager kind of park that ego to the side a little bit. And I think for some, that's self-reflecting is sometimes a hard thing to do, but that's really what we're talking about. It's really just being self-aware and understanding that you know you're the orchestra leader, you're the leader, and you're there, and it takes a team to get all this stuff done.
Yeah, yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Marcel, this has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's like I said at the beginning of this is one of my favorite subjects to talk about because I do think this is really the crux of what every organization needs to be focused on these days. And I thank the young people for kind of rubbing our noses in it a little bit. It's sort of like, hey, they're not looking for a paycheck. They're not motivated by their benefit packages and all that. They're motivated by being part of a team and participating in the process. And I think that's actually a pretty healthy way to look at things.
Yeah, it's a new world we live in.
It really is, isn't it? It really is. Well, again, Marcel, thank you so much. If people want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
Yeah, best way is on LinkedIn, Marcel Schwantes, or you can go to my website, marcelschwantes.com.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. From everybody at Pineapple Academy, we thank you.